afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank you all for a lovely lunch. As I was talking with Selva before we came up here, while my husband is a great chef, we don't normally eat Indian food at home. So it's been a real pleasure. We've been a bit careful making sure we don't have too spicy a food, even though we like spicy. So it's been an adventure that we're enjoying, and each day we enjoy it more. So in the context of what I'm going to share in the next 20 or 25 minutes here, I was the board liaison for this work group of IFHIMA that developed the white paper that we're going to talk about today, and the countries that we specifically talked about within the white paper. I had the absolute pleasure of working with a work group, and you'll see a slide in the future that details all of them. But talk about a work group leader that goes above and beyond. That was Jean Eaton from Alberta in Canada. She had all the technical tools, many that I had never heard of, to lead the group and to help us through this very diverse and complex process. Because once you say, well, okay, board, let's approve the funding we need to write and to publish a white paper, that's the easy part, really. It's deciding what you're going to say about privacy, what's the vision for privacy, privacy today, privacy in the past, and probably most importantly, privacy in the future. So Jean and I, along with everyone in this work group, worked our way through this. As you already know, IFHIMA has 22 member nations. We tried very hard as we developed this white paper to have a representative from each of the WHO regions. We didn't quite succeed, but it was a mission that we had, and it's one that we carry forward as we write future white papers. So what were our objectives when we started developing this paper and the board said, yes, this is an undertaking that is important to our membership. It is a white paper that's vital to how healthcare is being transformed. But we had to make sure, despite the good idea we thought it was, how does it fit with our IFHIMA objectives here? And these are pulled straight from the IFHIMA website if you haven't seen them before. It's to promote the quality and use of the records globally, to promote best practices or to provide best practices if they aren't evident, to develop and promote international standards in health information management. We never forget about our developing nations. In every board call, in every face-to-face board meeting, and we have one of those per year, we talk about how are we serving our developing nations through formal and informal education, and then how do we raise the profile of health information management? So it was really a pretty easy board decision to say, yes, let's recruit the volunteers, let's write this white paper, let's fund the design and editing of the white paper, and let's publish it and raise the profile of privacy and privacy in the context of health information management. As a part of this white paper development, this is one of the graphics that we had produced for us, because it's the classic, a picture tells 1,000 words. And this is a graphic that's in our slides, it's on our IFHIMA website, and it helps you think about, well, privacy is such a big, complex, diverse topic. Where do I get started? Is there a right place to start when you think about privacy? Well, the number one thing, as you see reflected there, is get involved. If you don't know much about privacy and how it's managed in your organization, or what the regulations are, what the technology is that you might use to secure and make sure data is private, you know, what the regional or national regulations are, get involved, read up on it, become a good conversationalist about it. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert. I would never tell anybody I'm a privacy expert, but I can carry on a good conversation about privacy. And do the communication within your organization. Train, train, and train. You can never train people too much about privacy. That happens to be one of Jean Eaton's specialty areas, And it's kind of amazing the conversations I have with her where she talks about, without naming her clients obviously, how she's undergone training and repeated training with her clients. And then commit, and this is certainly part and parcel to our professions, commit to ongoing professional growth through advancing privacy regulations, and privacy practices in your organization. And privacy isn't just unique to the job of whoever handles release of information in the health information or medical record department, or who's handling the data that's being used by the various technologies today. Privacy is really a commitment each of us has as a professional to ensure that we are respecting the privacy of the data that is being captured and used, because yes, it may be our data that's being captured and used, and we want to make sure it's treated with the appropriate respect and regulations and caution. If you haven't seen the white paper, and most of you probably have not, this is the link of how to secure a copy of the white paper on IFHIMA's website. You do have to sign up for our contact list in order to get the white paper. We promise we're not going to spam you with a lot of updates from IFHIMA. It's just so we can get a sense of who's downloading the white paper, who's using the content, and who might value the services and the information that we have to share. So by all means, log on, sign up, and you'll get the white paper, and occasionally you'll get other updates from IFHIMA. For instance, today, the latest global news is going to be released probably overnight here in India, because I read it yesterday and approved it. So things like that go out if you're on our contact list. So here's the panel, the work group people who contributed to this. You'll see Jean and I were leaders of this group. Jenny Gilder is from Australia and wrote the Australian case study. Angelika Handel from Germany, who is one of the past presidents of IFHIMA, she and I wrote the GDPR case study that's a part of this. Not that I'm from Germany, but I am German by heritage, so Angelika and I teamed up on the GDPR section. Mujib and Selva wrote the case study on Qatar. Oknam from South Korea, who is also a fellow board member of mine, she wrote a very interesting case study about the ISO, the International Standards Organization, and how they view privacy and how their standards help protect privacy. Dr. Sabu is here today, and he's going to follow me and talk about the Indian case study that's a part of this. Veronica Miller-Richards from Jamaica, Dorinda Sattler from the US, Dr. Rakesh, one of Dr. Sabu's colleagues, also helped with the Indian case study and some other components of the paper. Selva, who was kind enough to introduce me, and then Chris Wild was also from the US. So we tried very hard to have a diverse perspective in the paper and deliver content that we hope is of value to you. This should be seen as a working document. So why are we talking about privacy today? And is this a newfound phenomenon that we're really talking about? And the answer is absolutely not. Privacy standards have been around the world in various regulations for decades out there. The FIPS, the Fair Information Practice Principles, actually got started in the 1970s by the OECD and the US Department of, I think it was the Department of Commerce in the US. The Caldecott Principles came around in the 90s in the United Kingdom, and they have a lot of similarities to the FIPS. Yes, we have HIPAA in the US, and it's about 30 years old now. We have GDPR in the EU that has now been in place for about 2 years. It had been talked about and revised before the final regulations came out. I think that was about a 5 or a 6-year process. And these are just a few examples of the privacy standards around the world. So we've discussed the history of these in the context of the white paper, because there are commonalities or common themes you'll see that we talk about in the case studies and in the various practices and principles and processes that should be used by organizations today to ensure that we have safe, private health information. And you might say to me, well, Lorraine, why didn't you guys talk about security? Well, if we'd added security to our discussion, it probably would have been about like solving world hunger. We were lucky we got accomplished what we did with this great work group, and it took us about, let's see, I think it was 8 or 9 months to finish the content, and then 3 months to do the editing and the layout. So all in all, about a year, which is a very big undertaking, obviously. So why the call for healthcare privacy today? It's probably obvious, given what you heard this morning from the scientific panel that was talking to us just before we had lunch, and the other speakers this morning. We live in the era of digital data. Dr. Tony Cosgrove, who used to be the CEO at Cleveland Clinic, and he's now at Google Health, for better or for worse, he's at Google Health. And I'll tell you that in a second. But I heard him give a speech a couple of years ago that healthcare data was doubling by the year 2020, and that is where we're at. By the year 2020, he predicted that healthcare data would double every 73 days. Well, if that doesn't create the need for seriously considering what regulations you have for health data, who can see it, who can use it, is it personally identifiable, is it de-identified, what is the roles and responsibility, that certainly to me screams for the need for rigorous, well-documented healthcare privacy regulations and policies. We live in an increasingly mobile world. Again, we were told to shut off our cell phones before this afternoon session started. We live and breathe by our tablets, whether it's an iPad or a Samsung or our mobile phones, whatever we might use. It is absolutely a mobile world. And the regulations today reach beyond borders. And I think the GDPR proved that when it was enacted about 2 years ago. That is a harmonization of the 27 member nations of the EU. Each of those countries had their own data privacy and data protection regulations. And in fact, those regulations weren't wiped off the book when GDPR came to the European Union. It is that GDPR is reaching beyond each of those 27 borders and looking at data on an EU basis and way beyond, given the far reach of GDPR. So regulations reach beyond the borders because we travel, because data may be on a cloud in any continent around the world, and we have to have the privacy and security to ensure that only the people who are authorized users see that personally identifiable data, or that when it comes to de-identified data, that in fact there's rigor put to the de-identification process. And hence I'll go back to my story about Tony Cosgrove, who's now at Google Health. Some of you may have heard that about, I'd say it was about 8 or 10 weeks ago, Google Health made the news in the US and around the globe because it became known that they have all of the personally identifiable data for Ascension Health, which is the largest private nonprofit health system in the US. And the patients didn't know it. There was nothing, as I understand, in their consents that seemingly allowed all of their data to be going to Google Health. Now, to represent Google Health's side of the equation, they say it's a very small group of data scientists who have it, that in fact this is really a storage and a cloud storage platform, not a data analytics platform. So there's always two sides to every story, but I'm sure you could repeat this story around the globe of the large cloud vendors who are capturing and using either de-identified health data or personally identifiable health data. And that certainly goes beyond the borders and beyond regulations. So it's critical that the privacy of health information and the health data of you and I as health consumers or health patients, that be protected through this transformation process. All the analytics, all the machine learning and artificial intelligence, and the transformative activities that are underway today. We must make sure that privacy and the discussion of how we maintain privacy is discussed in the preliminary phases when you're designing and deploying, not in a reactive phase. And it's challenging at the same time when you think about how are you going to build systems and processes and educate individuals and all the workers that are out there. How are you also going to maintain the trust with your consumers or your patients or your citizen? At the same time, technology moves faster than regulations and standards. It's simply impossible for regulations to keep up with technology. Hence, you see the changes that came with GDPR. In the white paper, we talked about what's underway in Brazil today. Sabu is going to talk a bit about what's happening in India, and the list of countries could go on and on. In California, where I lived up until the last couple of years, the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, just went into place on January 1. So in the US, while you may have lots of national regulations, you are finding very rigorous state regulations also. And I'm sure that story is repeated around the world. So my thought is, amidst all of this discussion about privacy and how you maintain it and how you secure data, it becomes a stewardship obligation, a stewardship ethic related to the responsible handling of information and governance. The governance as people, process, and technology sets the ground rules for the execution of this responsibility. This is a direct quote that my co-author Linda Kloss and I put in our information governance white paper that dwells on a lot of aspects of stewardship and touches just a bit upon privacy. Again, there's the link so you can easily get access to it. So I close my segment and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sabu now to encourage you to listen, to observe, to learn, to think about what the regulations are in your organizations, what the processes are. Are you doing enough training for everybody? The answer is probably no. I don't know that any organization does enough training around privacy given the volatility and the growth of data. But think about privacy as one of those fundamental stewardship obligations you and I have as we create and use health data to make it a more wellness-oriented, consumer-driven health obligation. Thank you.